What's up, everybody? Welcome into another episode of Bulls Latest. Your host, Matt Johnson here. I wanted to kick today's show off by looking at and visiting a question that was brought up on ESPN's NBA Today yesterday by Dave McMenamin, and that was the question of how the Bulls can turn this franchise around. What do they need to do to get the entire trajectory of the Chicago Bulls on the right track? And Dave McMenamin brought up a great point on ESPN yesterday, stating that much like the Lakers franchise sale of $10 billion, it may take the Reinsdorf family finally selling. They are really, if you look at it, one of the final family-run businesses in the NBA now that the Lakers have made that massive sale. So that could be the next domino in which propels the Bulls into kind of jumping into more of a modern run franchise in the NBA and turning things around for the franchise as a whole. Now, will the Reinsdorfs probably sell sometime in the near future? I find that very hard to believe. The Bulls and the valuation of this franchise is billions and millions of dollars ahead of where it was when the Reinsdorfs bought the franchise way back when. I went over that in a previous episode in my show here. So if you're the Reinsdorfs, you really don't have reason to sell. However, that may be what it takes for the Bulls to finally take that next step in becoming more of a competitive entity here moving forward. Kind of spinning off of that, I wanted to go into more of the Reinsdorf family. How can a family like the Reinsdorfs, if they're going to stick around, compete in today's NBA? And that's what Dave McMenamin was kind of getting at. He doesn't believe that they can really compete with what's going on in today's league, and I kind of agree with that notion. But let's take a look at a way in which the Bulls could compete with the Reinsdorf still at the helm. Certainly, you could say they could make some better decisions when it comes to free agency, trade decisions, draft decisions. Over the past 5 to 10 years, they've kind of not produced when it comes to those things in running an NBA franchise. There's been a lot of questionable decisions with the Reinsdorfs in the ownership chair there, and that kind of trickles down to the basketball operations side. Arturas Karnisovas and Mark Eversley have been the most recent chapter of a lot of head-scratching decisions made by this organization. So when you look at a bigger picture, I don't know if they'll have the most competitive team if they have that ownership structure in place. Now, it's a shame because they're stuck in a place where I think the Reinsdorf family is and has reason to stick around. They don't they're not well liked by the fans. That's pretty obvious. But in a situation where they have Michael, the younger Reinsdorf, kind of calling the shots now, I find it hard to believe that Jerry will sell his portion, his stake in the Chicago Bulls. Obviously, he has the whole thing happening with the White Sox and his other hand of ownership there in the city of Chicago sports. The White Sox is much more plausible in terms of moving on. They've obviously reached out to Ishbia's brother there and making that sale. I talked about that a while back. But the Bulls are going to stay in Reinsdorf's hands, and I don't see that changing. The best hope for a Bulls fan, in my opinion, and I know there'd be a lot of differentiating opinions on this, but if the Reinsdorfs were to sell their stake in the Bulls, move on from that, much like the Lakers have made that $10 billion sale, I just think if the Bulls were to complete something like that, it would be a fresh start in the way things are handled and managed, and the Bulls would immediately become more modernized. So that's something that we'll continue to kind of look at and talk about as we move through this show and get closer to yet another season of the Jerry Reinsdorf ownership saga moving into 2025-26 here. Kind of shifting gears, I wanted to talk about, and this is a trade proposal I've visited multiple times throughout the show, and a guy I've continued to talk about since the start of Bulls Latest, and that's Jonathan Kuminga. I have a fresh trade proposal that is including some of the significant pieces that I've mentioned prior, but it's a new scenario here. In this, the Bulls would receive Jonathan Kuminga on a 4-year, $115 million contract with about $24 million a year in that base one comp, and they would also receive Trayce Jackson-Davis. This is a significant piece because in prior trades, I had the Bulls just taking home Jonathan Kuminga in a sign and trade for a singular player. Trayce Jackson-Davis gives the Bulls some depth and he's a young player, I think, with a lot of upside in what you can add to the Bulls organization. On the other side of this, you have the Warriors receiving Ayo Dosunmu, who's a guy I think continues to make sense for them and continues to be linked to Golden State. In addition to Ayo, this is new, Jalen Smith, and then the Bulls would be sending a 2029 first-round pick that would be lottery protected. So as I've talked about before in different scenarios, a lottery protected pick becomes 2 second-round picks in 2029 and 2030, if not conveyed. In addition, the Bulls would also send a 2028 second-rounder. So you'd have Ayo, Jalen Smith, a 2029 first, and a 2028 second, ultimately for Kuminga and Trayce Jackson-Davis. I think this trade makes a ton of sense, kind of spinning off of the Reinsdorf rationale here. It would keep the Bulls below the tax line, something that is important to the Reinsdorf ownership group. It's been reported that the Bulls would have no interest in sending out Kobe White in a potential sign and trade, but the Warriors are searching for a young player and draft capital, and they continue to do so. This is the most recent trade proposal that I could put together that makes some sense. Obviously, I've talked about since the jump pretty much, the Bulls would love to include veteran Nikola Vuchovich in a trade like this, but the Warriors have reportedly no longer hold any interest in adding Vuchovich. They're likely, and if it comes to happen here, I think it will, but they're likely to sign Al Horford, so they wouldn't need another older center there. So if Al Horford's a Warrior, kind of takes care of that problem for Golden State in wanting to add Vuchovich. But I think Trayce Jackson-Davis is the new piece to this that I think would offer a lot of excitement for Bulls fans. I think if you package him with Kuminga, that would be kind of an exciting duo there coming over to Chicago. You'd be shedding some draft capital, getting rid of a guy I know a lot of Bulls fans love in Ayo Dosunmu, but it makes some sense to kind of shake things up if you're the Bulls front office with a move like that. I just think the bigger question here, obviously the other side of this is, would the Bulls ever want to do this? They just landed they handed Patrick Williams a lot of money last season. Patrick Williams, a guy who brings his own troubles, and it's been its own headache for this Bulls franchise. And then obviously you just handed a lot of money over to a trade partner in Isaac Okoro with the other side of that Lonzo Ball deal. If you add 2 more kind of young, unproven guys in Trayce Jackson-Davis and Jonathan Kuminga, you give a lot more money to some unproven wings there. And that's the other kind of red flag here, is that how much money are you going to allocate to guys who are somewhat unproven to this point in the league? That would definitely be a roll of the dice for the Bulls. Now, those are situations where you kind of have to make a choice. And if you have to roll the dice sometimes to hit big as an NBA executive, and this could be the next chapter of that for the Bulls. Now, are they in position to do that? I would definitely disagree more so on that side of things, but you never know. The Bulls are definitely an organization that is willing to kind of jump at things if they propose themselves in this manner. So we'll continue to watch out for that. I wanted to kind of close today's show by switching gears and talking about a guy. Again, he's been the center of a lot of talks in these shows, but Nikola Vuchovich, and why the way things are continuing to look, I find it hard to believe that Boston is not the best suitor for Nikola Vuchovich. I think if you look at Boston, unlike most teams around the league who have their center, Boston doesn't to this point. They don't have a center that's their perennial guy at the moment. As it stands, their center rotation next year is going to be Neemias Queta. He's the starter currently. They have Luka Garza as the backup and rookie Amari Williams as the third string, likely on a 2-way deal. Can't tell me that a team like Boston is going to kind of accept that movie. I get it. It's a gap year with Jason Tatum and that injury, but there's just no way I believe that Boston's going to enter this next season with Neemias Queta as their starter, with Luka Garza kind of bringing in the backup role there at that position. If you can find a way to kind of swap Vuchovich and put him in a 2-way deal there that brings back Anthony Simons. Now, this is a deal, if you guys remember, I talked about a while back, kind of right when Anthony Simons was sent over to Boston. Finding a way to do this could make both parties satisfied that are involved. I think the Bulls would particularly get a deal done here that can shed salary as well, with Boston being able to shed a lot of that money given to a guy and kind of clear up some money for Anthony Simons there. Boston will be able to dip further below the second apron by trading Simons, all while, using adding a stopgap center there in Vuchovich. So if from Boston's point of view, they would be able to, kind of free up some money all while getting that guy who can play the center position in a year that's going to be in flux for Boston moving forward. It's going to be an interesting season with Tatum continuing to rehab that injury. Moving forward, they'll be without him, obviously. Perhaps the Bulls would have an easier time flipping Simons, too. If the Bulls were to receive him, they could have an easier time flipping him or extending him at the end of the season, not having to try to trade Vuchovich. And that could be another option here, another way to look at this moving forward. So definitely an option there. I think when you look at Nikola Vuchovich, he's the perfect fit for Boston at the moment. And I think Anthony Simons offers some excitement for the Bulls and getting that back. So a couple scenarios there. One trade proposal makes a ton of sense in terms of both sides and what they necessarily need. The other is kind of a roll of dice, some unproven talent there when it comes to some players on the other side of that Warriors deal that the Bulls would be bringing back. So overall, I want to thank you guys for joining me on another episode of Bulls Latest, and we will catch you guys next time.